welcome to Monday Night Live. This is our first live interview for Hear Me Now Ministries. I'm John Nixon Sr., and I'm so happy and proud tonight to be able to share the screen with a longtime friend and colleague who is the newly elected pastor of the Potomac Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. I'm going to bring up Pastor Charles Tapp, who is joining us from his office today in Virginia. He has not long, several months now, taken up this new position. Pastor Tapp, welcome. Thank you for being with us. And take a minute to introduce yourself to those who just may not know you, maybe seeing you for the first time. And tell us about who you are, maybe a little bit about your path to the ministry. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Always glad to connect with my old friend and buddy. I don't know if people know or not, but you and I have had the opportunity to work together twice in ministry. You were the senior pastor at Hanson Place in Brooklyn, and I came as your associate. Yeah. And then you went to Oakwood. You were the senior pastor there, and I came as your associate at that time. And you're talking about 13 years later.
Yeah, you're talking about almost 20 years apart. Two different. Yeah. One was in the 80s, and then the other was late 90s or so.
Yeah,
and then you went off on your own and to do great things, and look where you are now. We had a great time together those years. And both those times, you put me on the radio, which I'd never done before. I got teamed up with you.
Yeah, that's true. Well, currently I'm the president of the Potomac Conference since March, second week of March. I believe it was March 14.
It's really new.
For those of your audience who may not be familiar with Potomac, it's not one of the regional conferences. It's one of the state conferences. So I'm actually the first African-American president in its history. So that took place in March of this past year.
And so did you have a COVID session, constituency session?
We actually did. It lasted about 6 hours. To be quite frankly, but it went well. COVID shut down a lot of things. It shut down the churches. Before I became president, I was the senior pastor of Sligo Church, which is on the campus of Washington Adventist University in Tacoma Park, Maryland. I was the senior pastor there for about 13 years prior to being elected as the president. And we had to shut down too as a church and pretty much as a conference over a year ago. It's been about 15, 16 months, I believe, since we initially shut down. So not only was the session a COVID session, church for the majority of our churches within the Potomac Conference, which makes up the District of Columbia, the entire state of Virginia, and Montgomery and Prince George's counties in Maryland.
So not the whole state of Maryland. Okay.
That's correct.
Because you share Maryland with Chesapeake, is that it?
Chesapeake and Allegheny East.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, go back a little bit. So you're at Sligo for 13 years.
Yeah.
Which is a university church.
That's correct.
Also, I think the largest church in the conference. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. I believe it's the largest in the Columbia Union.
Okay. Now, did you not go there first as an associate and then become senior?
I did.
Well, how many years in total were you there then?
Oh, about 15 years.
Yes.
About 15 years. It's been an interesting ministry because, I was at the Seabrook Church for 2 years, 2 sessions rather. I was there as an associate, then went back as a senior pastor. I was at Oakwood with you as an associate. And then when you went on sabbatical, I came and filled in as the interim senior pastor.
I forgot about that.
While I was the associate at Sligo Church.
So our conference president, for those who don't know, our conference president at the time was Joe McCoy, actually contacted Potomac Conference and asked if they could borrow you while I was writing my dissertation.
That's correct. That's correct.
Pastor Oakwood, whatever many months it was, and you came back while you're holding position in another conference. You come all these miles south to Oakwood to pastor Oakwood Church. At the same time, you're a pastor.
At the same time, it was actually 4 months from January through April. I think it ended around the alumni weekend time. But I did that when I was much younger. I was hopping on a plane twice a week.
I know. I was younger too, but I was trying to get my dissertation finished while I was pastoring, and I just couldn't get finished. So he gave me time off to get it completed. That was a blessing to me because I was able to spend just whole days in the library getting my work done. He knew you knew Oakwood, and Oakwood knew you.
Yeah,
he knew what to expect of you, so he felt comfortable bringing you in on short notice like that. And of course, it went famously, and it worked out great. I don't know if I ever thanked you for that properly. I'm send you something in the mail. I'm sending you a little gift or something. You can get more.
That's fine. That's fine.
Now, you look back on it now and think about how those experiences prepare you for what you're doing right now. I mean, you weren't thinking about it at the time, obviously, but I mean, think about that.
Every experience in the past, a lot of individuals have asked me, well, did Sligo, the 13 years of Sligo, prepare you for being the president? Actually, it's all of my ministry. Mm-hmm. The entire 40-year period, I believe, is what God used to prepare me for this particular position at this particular time. And as you said, when you're going through it, you have no idea, which is why, as pastors and those in ministry, we should not shun the direction and the responsibilities that God gives us, because you just don't know in the end the overall plan, that God has in store for us. I never wanted to be a conference president. I made that public from the time I got into the ministry in 1982. I said, you know what? There's one position I will never take. And that is being a conference president. I said there may be some other positions within the administration, maybe ministerial secretary, VP for ministries, maybe communications. But when it comes to being the president, I said I will never accept that position.
Well, I understand that. But like you say, God has his own plans.
Yeah.
Which of course also plays into this issue of how when we try to take matters into our own hands with our ministries, whatever stage of ministry we may be in, we are uprooting a plan that God has in mind, and we may not like where we end up.
Right. And again, when you go into ministry, it's not really a job as much as it is a calling, and you go where you're called. I'll never forget, my first church was in Elmira, New York. Yeah, man, right there by the prison.
Northeastern Conference.
In Northeastern Conference. I spent 11 years in Northeastern Conference.
That's how long I was there, 11 years as well.
Yeah, see, I'm following you, man.
Okay.
But when I was pastoring in Elmira, it was the a dead town, depression, economics, unemployment was extremely high. 62 members. I was their first pastor, and it was rough. I was a single man at the time. Whoa. And we were renting a building. And I remember an older pastor saying to me as he came through town, he said, listen, you will not be here always, but pastor these people, love these people. And I never forgot that. I can't remember who said this. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Yeah. So all throughout my ministry, it has been about showing people, demonstrating to people just how much I care, not just with words, because, words fall, but it's with the presence. It's demonstrating with the physical presence, as I call the ministry of presence. Don't just show up when it's time for you to preach, pastors. Mm-hmm. Go to Sabbath school, go to the children's Sabbath school, hang out with the youth and the young adults and the senior members, do visitation, do all of that, because that's what the calling is about. And as you know, that's what really molds your preaching.
Exactly.
It's not the homiletic classes and all that, but it's going to the bedside of someone who has a tumor the size of a grapefruit, and you see tubes connected to their body, and you have to go preach, and you preach differently when you deal with issues like that. So God prepared me doing some strange things that people did not understand why I did them. Going to Sligo the first time as a associate pastor for this brand new initiative called Sligo PM, where they had a service 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon, trying to reclaim some former Adventists, as well as trying to reach out to some young adults. They never understood why I did that, why I went to Sligo as a youth, young adult pastor to do that. But if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have gone back as senior pastor. They never understood, why would you leave New York, go to Jamaica, for 2 years?
Talk about that for a minute. Talk about that. That's an unusual path. You done some strange things in your ministry, man. You think it's unusual road. Talk about that for just a minute and tell us how that.
I tell you, Jamaica was interesting because what led up to that, as you know, when I was pastoring in New York, I was heavy into radio, heavy into media communications, had this dream of what we could do as a conference. Sadly, they weren't ready for it at the time. When I shared it with you, you embraced it. You went on the radio there, you went on radio in Oakwood, and you're doing your communications thing now. But they weren't really ready for it. And I was praying to leave New York, actually, because I wanted to do media, but I wanted to teach at one of our colleges or universities. So I got this call late one night from a guy I'd never met. He was the president of West Indies College in Jamaica. Now it's Northern Caribbean University, NCU. And he said, someone told me about you and the things you're doing in New York. Would you be willing to come and do something for us here? We don't have much, but, and would you be willing to teach in the religion department as well? And when he said that, my hands started shaking. I said, let me think about that, And I hung up the phone, John, and I sat there in bed. It was by 11 p.m. and cried like a baby because it was God speaking to me saying, you know what, you've had this dream. You thought it was going to be New York. I'm going to take you out the country to be able to do this. And when we went, all they had at the college at the time was an empty room. So I packed up my studio and shipped it. And that's another story. I don't have time to even talk about what happened with that, with customs and, all the ins and outs of that. But long story short, we were there for 2 years, raised some money, built a studio, and now they have their own radio station, their own TV station right there on campus.
That's wonderful. Now, you say we had, at that point in time, you were married, you had kids by then? Or?
All of our kids were born. The youngest daughter, we have 3 daughters. The youngest was 10 months old.
Okay, wow.
And people really thought we were crazy, leaving New York, going to Jamaica with a 10-month-old baby. She was the youngest, but my wife was originally from Jamaica. Okay. So all 3 of my children went to the same elementary school that she did, which is right across the street.
Wow. It's amazing. College. It's amazing. I didn't realize how amazing your path was. I knew you had some unusual things until this conversation right now. Yeah. You also took an unusual path. Maybe it's not so unusual anymore, into the presidency, in that you never held a position in the office as a department director or an administrator. You went from the pulpit straight to the presidency. Mm-hmm. That's not really the traditional path to go that way.
Right. The traditional path, as you know, is having been in the office, whether it's a youth director, secretary, or some other position, VP, whatever. But lately, I discovered, we had some meetings about 2 or 3 weeks ago of all of the new conference presidents within the Columbia Union. And all 9 of us came straight from the pulpit.
No way.
Straight from the pulpit.
All 9.
And it's even beyond, I'm sorry, it's beyond the Columbia Union. It actually encompasses the entire North American division, because Buddy Bird was also in those meetings. So this was across the NAD.
9 new presidents in NAD, all going straight from the pulpit to the
straight from the pulpit, which says to me, God is doing something. I don't know whether you want to call it unusual or not. But I was talking to another administrator the other day, and he was saying maybe God wants a more pastoral touch to this office, at this particular time. And a lot of people think that the office of the president is this thing that's just so different from everything else. And there are some nuances to it that you have to learn. But the number one thing is leadership. Right. And leadership is about people. I was telling our AdCom the other day, leadership without relationship is dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to really be a leader, whether it's a conference president or a pastor, you have to build on the relationship. So if you love people and you love God and you're called to be a leader, God can use you anywhere. Yes, you have to learn some administrative things, but this is the other piece that I've discovered because of the journey that God, had me on for the last 40 years, pastoring some very large churches, large congregations, being on tons of committees, hospital boards, university boards, radio station boards. I mean, and on and on and on. All of that came into play. Now, having a degree in accounting that I got at Oakwood, I did a double major.
Mm-hmm.
All of that stuff came together. The pieces came together. So yes, like I said, there's some nuances that you have to learn with any new position, even as a pastor going to a new church. But it's about leadership, and it's about having a vision, and it's about being God-led and allowing God to lead. I was reading just the other day that, God gives God-sized assignments. And the reason why he gives us these God-sized assignments is because he wants us to depend on him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was talking to Elder Rock the other day when he heard that I had gotten elected. He reached out and called me. And this is one piece of advice he gave that I will never forget. He said,
Calvin Rock is the retired former president of Oakwood University.
That's correct.
40, 50 years in the ministry, served up to the general conference level. For those who don't know, this is the contact Pastor Tapp's talking about right now. He talked to Calvin Rock and
chaired the Loma Linda board for several years. He said to me, son, when you need it, God will give it. And I said, that's deep.
As long as he's the one who placed you there.
Yeah. If he placed you there, when you need it, he will give it. You won't get it most times until you need it.
That's somebody who knows, personal experience. So I'm listening to you now, and so what I'm hearing you say is that as you look back now on your path,
mm-hmm.
You said, 40 years in ministry now? Is it 40 years? You look back on your path now, and you look at the steps that you were led on down through the years,
mm-hmm.
starting in Elmira, New York, as a pastor. And you can see how piecing it together, how God getting you ready for the next step along the way.
Right.
This is with you now, taking your ministry and your life, placing it into his hands, and then saying, talk to me about what you and your wife said about your commitment to ministry. And I'm bringing this up because it's an issue now, particularly, and you know this as a president in pastor families,
mm-hmm.
it's different now than it used to be in terms of pastors moving, how it affects the rest of the family. I'm not sure it's more complex than we're ready to even understand at this point in time, but it certainly has changed from our time starting out. Right. Tell me about the commitment you and your wife made at the beginning and how all the unexpected things you had to adapt to in ministry and how you dealt with that as a family, as a father, as a husband,
right.
Leading your family through.
That's a good question because it all begins with a call. God called Moses to the bush, and I believe he calls us to our own personal bushes. So we decided early on never to make a move unless we felt it was a God move, a God-led move. There was only one time in our ministry where we decided to make a move where it wasn't, we thought maybe God was calling because we were doing something good, mm-hmm. but it fell apart very quickly. And we discovered, it's dangerous even to do something good mm-hmm. when it's not God led. Mm-hmm. So we decided, never again will we ever step out to try to do anything of our own. It was the only time in my ministry where I sought a call as opposed to just waiting for God to call. And that's a dangerous thing to do. And you see a lot of that today. Pastors who are ready to move and they'll start putting out feelers and sending resumes, and that may work in the secular world, but when it comes to the call to the ministry, at least for me, that's not the way I operate. I wait until I feel impressed by God as he speaks. And you know, when you've heard God's voice, you know, when you've seen how God works, how, to recognize his calling in your life. So you're pretty sure, well, that's God. Maybe that's God. We need to stop and pray and maybe fast about that. And when it came to this position, I'm going to be quite honest, as I was with the nominating committee, I didn't want this. The office of the presidency. Didn't ask for it. I had been in Sligo now 13 years as senior pastor. I'm 62 years of age. I'm looking at the end, whatever that means, whatever that will look like. And I just said from the very beginning of my ministry, this is something I never wanted to do, never would do it. And when the nominating committee met, and they came up with two names, and my name was the number two name. And they decided, well, if the number one name decides not to take it, then we'll just automatically go to the number two. So my prayer was, thank God, the number one. He's going to take this, praise God from whom all blessings flow.
Number one.
So the union president gave him a couple of days to think about it, pray about it. He came back to me and said he decided not to take it. And I just went to this place where first I was praying, not my will, Lord. I was praying the Gethsemane prayer. Take this cup from me. So when he decided, to think about it and pray about it, I thought God was taking the cup from me. Mm-hmm. But when he turned it down, my prayer went from take this cup from me to not my will, to your will be done. And as they say, the rest is history.
So this is your path to the presidency. Now, Maureen, your wife, is a professional. Her education is in what area?
It was in nursing, but up until recently, she was working in hospital administration.
Okay. And so down through the years, her own profession, her own career for which she prepared and trained, she's being affected too in her career path. Mm-hmm. There must have been times along the way where that interrupted her career path, perhaps even your children's school path. I know I had that experience. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Well, actually it was easier for her because of her profession to get another job no matter where we went. Being in New York those 11 years, although we moved to different churches, we didn't have to physically move. When I was in Elmira, I was a single man. But when we came to the city after graduate school, for the rest of the time there, we stayed in the city. Different congregations I served as pastor, but didn't have to move. When it was time to go to Jamaica, that was our home country. We prayed about that, felt that was God's leading. Even coming back, this is interesting. Coming back, I had no call. We signed up for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And the reason why we signed up for 2 years was because we felt that was enough time. If it was good, if it was great, we're coming back. If it was terrible, it's only 2 years.
Coming back, yeah.
And we're coming back. But it was more than great. It was better than good. But while there, and all about this, I got the bug to teach. I just loved teaching. I got bitten by this bug. And I said, you know what, God, I feel as though you're leading me to continue to teach. I don't want to go back and pastor a church. So when it came down to it, a couple of weeks before we were to leave, I got a call to come back to Northeastern, and I turned it down. Mm. The president was Stennett Brooks at the time. And he said, I have a place I'm going to send you up to Rochester. You can work on your doctorate, nice sized congregation. I said, Elder, I'm going to have to turn that down. He said, oh, so you have another call? I said, I have nothing. He said, and you're coming back in 2 weeks? I said, Elder, I really don't have anything right now. I feel as though God is leading me in this teaching journey. He said, okay, long story short, a few days before we were to leave, I got a call from a friend in Atlanta who told me about a position at Tacoma Academy as freshman, sophomore Bible teacher, which is right down the street from Sligo, by the way.
Yeah.
Because the teacher at the time, Dunbar Henry, had become principal, and this is in August, and school was starting in about a week, and they needed a freshman, sophomore Bible teacher / chaplain. I thought my career would go the way of continuing to teach and be a college instructor.
Right.
But the academy thing came up, and believe it or not, the college, West Indies College, paid for my ticket to fly up for an interview and to fly back. Had the interview that Monday, flew up Sunday, had the interview Monday, flew back Tuesday. They called me, said, get back on a plane. You're hired. School starts next week.
Wow.
Left my family in Jamaica. We had packed everything up. They came to the States the following week, went to Florida, stayed with her mom for about 3 months until I got settled in Maryland. But here's the thing about the teaching in the academy. And I did it for 2 years. If I had my way, every pastor would teach an academy for at least a year. It will change your world. It would change your perspective about pastoring. I learned how to preach to different audiences. I have 32 students. Some are more visual, some are more creative, engaged that way. So you had to come out of the box. You couldn't just stand behind a lectern and talk. You had to really come up with some creative things. But those 2 years taught me a lot. And I was teased by a lot of my colleagues. When are you going to get your own church again? Man, you teaching at an academy. How are you going to teach? Tapp, how you going to teach at an academy, man? I said, listen, I've got these kids 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. Who do you think does more ministry, you or me? Now, what's interesting, though, how did I get the call to go to Sligo as young adult pastor? Those kids I taught at the academy, they got older.
They're the young adults of Sligo.
They became the young adults. They were on the search committee. When the position became available, they reached out to me.
Boy,
so if I had not gone to Tacoma Academy, if I had not lowered myself to go to a Tacoma Academy to teach high schoolers, I would have never been the young adult pastor. If I had never been the young adult pastor, I would have never been the senior pastor. If I had never been the senior pastor of the largest church in the Union, I wouldn't be the president right now.
Boy, what a path. That's so interesting. And of course, nothing you could have plotted out yourself. I'm also thinking about how that position for 2 years put you in touch with a generation in the church that usually isn't spotlighted in our churches.
That's correct. That's correct. And I left, I've always loved young people.
Yes.
So it's not something I had to work at.
To the children in the church than we do to that age group right in the middle. They kind of get overlooked.
They get lost.
So now, not you. Here you are. You're focusing for 2 years on that group. And of course, you're growing in your ministry in that area. And as you said, those kids grow up. They remember you later on when they are in decision-making positions.
That's correct.
Then they have a relationship with somebody that they know from school and say, hey.
I could have never orchestrated that. I was just following God's call on my life. So when my colleagues teased me, man, you teaching at an academy? How are you going to teach at an academy?
Wow.
It's the call of God. And if we're truly called, then we have to be willing, able, and available. As E.E. Cleveland would always say, you got to be willing, able.
And of course, your experience also sheds light on the importance of having diversity in your leadership. We have to be able to adapt new positions and skills. You didn't study in college how to be an academy teacher,
right,
or for that matter, a college professor at West Indies, but were able to adapt to those positions when those opportunities came your way. It's really a very exciting career to be in when you keep yourself open to the movements that God has in mind.
And you talk about diversity, not just within the context of what I'm doing, but who I'm doing it with.
Right.
Sligo Church is probably one of the most diverse, really, truly diverse congregations in the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Enlarge on that. How so?
We had, well, they have. Well, I guess I said we have since I'm the
You're the
president.
president. You still have, still we.
Over of 100 different people groups, there. Every color under the sun. Even at the academy at the time, it was extremely, culturally, ethnically, racially diverse. And what really helped me in that, when I was at Oakwood as a student, I got these summer jobs, these internships working in the Northern California Conference 3 years in a row. The first job I got was working with Ezra Mendenhall. I know you know that last name.
I know that name.
Very well.
I know Ezra well. Yeah.
And the church, he was the first African-American pastor of this church and had this extremely diverse church. And I was his intern for the summer. And I said something to the congregation one day. I said, this is a rainbow church. And that stuck with them and it stuck with me. And I came back for 2 additional summers within that conference doing different things. But what it did, it sparked something within my spirit that I felt at that particular time that God was calling me to a very unique ministry as an African-American pastor, not just to preach and teach and to minister to my own people, but to minister to people from various different and diverse groups. And I really believe that he was actually at that time preparing me, exposing me to something different. You see, my journey is different. I didn't grow up in Adventism. I became an Adventist when I was 16, about to turn 17. I was the only Adventist in my family. So I didn't have this vision of the Adventist church. So God allowed me to be exposed in these different areas to enlarge my vision, to enlarge my capacity of what this church was really all about. So being exposed to the diversity, the cultural, ethnic, racial diversity there in California, it just stuck with me. And now as I look back on it, especially having gone to, Potomac Conference, being there at Sligo, being there at Tacoma Academy, being there at Seabrook, I see what God was doing. Of course, I had no idea what he was doing at the time, but he was enlarging my vision as to what he wanted me to do and to who he wanted me to minister to.
That's excellent. Now, you said something that I want to take us down the road I had not planned, but since you brought it up, I'm going to come back to, I want to talk about diversity in your conference as well. You brought that up, but go back for a minute and talk to us about how you became an Adventist at 16 out of a family that was not Adventist. Just give us that story as well for our listeners. That's an interesting story.
I just told this story the other day, and every time I tell it, I keep saying I either have to write a book or an article about this. Long story short, a Jehovah's Witness brought me into the Seventh Adventist Church.
Wait. Stop right there. Stop right there. I'm going to have to start calling you the unusual pastor. I've never heard anybody some of this stuff you talk about that you went through. Yeah. Now, repeat that one sentence so we can just sink in for a minute. Say that one more time.
A Jehovah's Witness brought me into the Seventh-day Adventist. We don't even have enough time now to get into that. But let me just say this. I was looking as a young person, searching for truth. I had been exposed to the Sabbath at a young age, figured it out on my own when I was in the Baptist church. The Baptist leadership couldn't give me the answers that I wanted, that I needed. So at 16, John, I told my parents, I'm done. I'm not going back to the church. My mother looked at me like I had lost my last mind. She said, as long as you're in my house,
we know that.
You will be a Baptist. Well, guess what? My parents separated for a few months. And it was during that time I became an Adventist. So I was no longer in her house. They got back together, but it was during that time period where God exposed me to Adventism by introducing me to a young woman who went to the same high school I went to. By the way, the church that I ended up joining was right down the street from the high school. So I passed it every day when I got off the bus to go to the school, but yet I never saw the church. It was there. I never saw it, but I passed it 5 days a week for 2 straight years and never saw the church until I went there for a week of prayer. I didn't know what a week of prayer was. She said, come to my church. We're having a week of prayer. I'm going, oh, you guys are weak in prayer, so you need to pray more? So a week of prayer. But I went, and the preacher's name, man, I can't remember it right now. It escapes me, and I'm going to shoot myself for not thinking.
We want to hear about the Jehovah's Witness, man. You got to take us back there now. We want to hear
that story is, trust me, it is too long. It is too long. Maybe if you have me back, I'll tell that story. All right. But I ended up at the church. Milton Young.
Oh, Milton Young, I know him.
Milton Young was there, and he preached. And what really sparked my attention was, in the Baptist church, the preacher would open the Bible, read a text, and close it.
Right.
And then do his thing for the next however long. But he opened his Bible, and he kept it open. And he went from page to page, chapter to chapter, verse to verse, and it all connected. So I said,
Because you're noticing this as a 16-year-old,
I said, this is, because I'm from the Baptist tradition. You open it, you read it, and then you howl for the next 30 minutes or so. I said, this is interesting. So I came back the next night, and I came back the next night, and I came back the next night. So I said, I'm coming to church on Saturday. And I came, believe it or not, ready to join the church because I have been fasting and praying for months for the Lord to lead me to the truth. Mm-hmm. I visited Pentecostal churches where they were jumping up and down, foaming at the mouth. I went to all kinds of places trying to find truth. So I was ready to join the church, sitting there in the pew, didn't hear the sermon. All I was listening for was, and now, we want to open the doors to the church. And he never did.
He never opened the doors of the church?
He never made an invitation.
Oh, wow.
Which was unusual. I discovered later for him because he was an evangelist as well. Never opened the door. So
he was a guest at that church. He wasn't in his church.
No, he was the pastor.
He was the pastor.
So he gave the benediction, and I got up and I said, where's the pastor? And they said, he's in his office. I said, where's the office? Now I'm 16, John.
Yeah.
And he said, the office is down the hallway. I said, thank you. And I went down the hallway, knocked on his office door. He said, may I help you? I said, sir, I came here today to join the church. And you didn't open the doors to the church. I got to write a book about this, because I can't make this stuff up, And he said, I'm sorry, young man. He said, tell you what, come back next week. I'm going, come back next week? Dude, I'm here right now.
I'm here now.
But I came back next week. And as soon as he said, now the doors, I popped up from my seat, walked down the aisle, got baptized, went home. My father said to me, did you get baptized today? Because I had a big fro and it was wet at the time, And I said, yeah. He said, oh. And that was the extent of the conversation.
Papa's okay with it. Mom's want to get the problem.
Well, and she came around later when I became a pastor.
Right.
And then she began to brag, my son, the pastor,
So Pastor Young now, going back to his week of prayer, he, during that week, was having an influence on a person who, in the years to come, would have an influence on thousands and thousands of more persons. All those churches, starting in Elmira, up to Sligo, and now in the presidency, all the lives you've influenced and all the persons you've been giving responsibility for under God.
Right.
That week is shaping your introduction to that life path that God has for you. So when we stand up in the pulpit on Sabbath, every one of us, whatever size the church, we stand on Sabbath, we have no clue how far-reaching an impact we can have in those moments when we have the attention of the room, right? The attention of the room is on us. We got the Bible in our hand, turning pages that change lives.
Yeah.
And we got an opportunity right there to shape the world in ways we can never imagine and might never, ever find out.
Yeah. And see, John, you and I have both done radio over the years. So you're talking about tens of thousands of people that we have impacted, most of whom we will never meet. But I'll tell you this, I had an opportunity to thank him while I was interim senior pastor at Oakwood when you were working on your doctorate. He showed up.
Is that so? Is that so?
I walked into your office, and there he was standing there.
Wow.
And it blew me away. Had not seen him since I was a student at Oakwood, I believe it was. And he and his wife came out and they sat in the congregation. So when I got up to preach, I said, I may never get this opportunity again. And I had he and his wife stand. I said, I want to pay homage to this man. If it were not for M.M. Young, Milton Young, I would not be sitting here right now.
That's powerful. That is powerful. That's amazing. Hope you're listening, preachers, teachers. I hope you're listening. You got those kids in the classroom for what, 5-6 hours a day?
Yeah.
I hope you're listening, because it's hard to lose. It's easy to lose sight of it sometimes when we're thinking about just the day-to-day journey of our job, to think about that long view that God has in mind with those people he's placed under our responsibility and influence for whatever length of time we had. Let me go back to the personal, because I'm watching the time. I want you share with us a little bit about your personal journey with your family, including Maureen, some of the ups and downs you guys had with her health and so forth. I don't know how much you feel comfortable sharing, but just give us an idea. We're trying now to get your story out there, because through stories, we learn a lot about life. We can compare our own story to your story. We can think about our future and the things you've been through. So just share a little bit more of that with us, that personal side of the journey with your wife. She went through some health challenges, and I think she's still having some of them, but what can you share?
About 15 years ago, I think I was senior pastor at Seabrook at the time. My wife came down with a very rare disease called neuromyelitis optica. It is similar to multiple sclerosis, but it's much more severe in nature. It can cause blindness and even death. Long story short, she was working at the time, ultimately became paralyzed from the waist down. We didn't know what was going on. Had these attacks. At one point, thought she was going to actually die. We got her will together, the whole 9 yards, called all the kids in, called the family together. But there was a doctor at Johns Hopkins who was the world-renowned physician in this particular disease. And one of our members, who was a physician at Johns Hopkins, said, why don't you just go see if you can get in with this guy? So we sat there, waited, got in with him. He said, she doesn't have MS, as was diagnosed earlier. She has this disease called neuromyelitis optica. So he gave her some treatments and medication, and she started moving her feet. So she went from being paralyzed in a wheelchair to a walker to now being walking with a cane. She is disabled, has not worked in about 15, 16 years, had a career in hospital administration after so many years in nursing. But, God has helped us through this. It's I could tell story, and she could tell story after story after story as it relates to this. But again, it's about trusting God. And what does that really mean? I wrote an article for those who are watching this. If you want to go back and read it, it was an article in Ministry Magazine, and I believe the year was 2009. It was the feature article. I wrote it a year earlier when I was pastoring at Seabrook, but they published it when I initially went to Sligo as senior pastor. So it was 2009, and it's called Preaching Through a Storm. You could even go online to Ministry Magazine and just put in Preaching Through a Storm. And I talked about the whole journey of going through depression, going on sabbatical. And I went on sabbatical when she started to improve a little bit. 2 weeks into going on sabbatical, her health went south. So I never really got the sabbatical. Talked about how as a preacher, I didn't want to even pick up the Bible. Well, I didn't. During this 3-month period that I was on sabbatical, didn't pick up a Bible. What I did was I pulled out old sermons of mine and read them and listened to the audio tapes of them. So I came up with the title of this piece for ministry, Preaching Through a Storm. I was preaching, but I was preaching to myself.
To yourself.
Yeah.
So the word you've been giving to people, the word God gave you for other people, is now coming back to minister to you at a critical time when you're really down, down in your faith and feeling. Now, at this point in time, the girls are about grown, I guess, or close to grown.
I think the oldest was in grad school. The middle one was in college.
Give us their names. We became the oldest, middle one.
Maylene is the oldest one. I think she was working on her degree in engineering in Atlanta at the time. Tiffany was a school teacher. She was in college at Oakwood at the time. Victoria was the baby. She was in the academy at Tacoma Academy. So it impacted her the most.
She was still living at home. Yeah.
She was still living at home. So it impacted her the most. I think we pulled her out of TA and put her in Pine Forge for a year because she wanted to get away, you know. Yeah. Which was good for her. But, you know, a lot of times as pastors, we don't like being vulnerable, you know, and I had to be very vulnerable when in writing that article, recognizing that the S on my chest doesn't stand for Superman. It stands for sinners saved by grace. Yeah. And I talk about in the article, too, how we need to allow during those difficult times as pastors for our members to minister to us.
Yeah.
And that's something God had to really teach me. And they came through with flying colors. Could not have made it if it had not been for the faithful members there at the Seabrook Church who ministered to us during that time, just like the folk at Sligo did when we both got COVID for about 3 months last year, rather.
At the same time, I didn't realize that.
This year, yeah. At the end of 2020, last Sabbath of December, I felt funny, you know. So I said, well, let me just preach through this last sermon of the year. You know, time to go on vacation, and was down for the next 3 months.
Wow. And Maureen already compromised in her health.
Already compromised. She got it a week later. We both had to go to the hospital to get the infusion. That helped a great deal. Still have some residual effects. I feel as though I went from being 62 to 65.
in a few months.
In a few months, yeah. The energy that I had at 60, 61, don't have it. The things I could do at 61 in my yard, in my garden, can't do it now.
COVID, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it's not a joke.
I wanted to have some time for Maureen to share. We couldn't. We planned that. We couldn't because she's not with you right now. But at some point, I want to hear her story and how she went through all of that. She was brave and courageous pastor's wife. I know she's been by your side all these years through all the ups and downs. And of course, when we were at Oakwood together, before you left to go to Seabrook, started having a little bit of that, not as severe as you're describing now, but a little bit of those health challenges right there at Oakwood before she left.
That's true.
Deal with some of that. So we saw a little bit of that in the beginning, my wife and I. But we'll get another chance to talk to her some other time and hear her side of the story on that. We'd love to be able to share that. Again, we're sharing with people who have experiences like yours, or who will have them and don't know it yet.
Oh, yeah.
Both for them, but they can refer back to your experience and know from the path that you've taken how God can lead through all these different circumstances. We thank you for sharing that. Now, let me ask you, I've got my little list here of questions here. I'm not going to go looking at the time, but I do want to ask you this question. You've been talking to us the last 45 minutes or so about your own journey in the ministry, your personal journey coming into the church in your teenage years, your journey now into administration. Think back for a minute and tell me, if you can, one or two things that you see that have changed in the Adventist ministry from the time that you began. If you were to think, not necessarily negative things, negative positive, whatever, but I didn't prepare you for this, but as you're thinking right now, a couple of things you would say when you go back 40 years to when you started to where you are now. One of the things you've seen to change in the ministry, or maybe even in the Adventist church during that time, that kind of strike you, that from your position of an experienced leader would say, here's a picture I can look at long view and think about my role in this journey in the church right now in the present and position that I'm in What comes to mind?
I tell you, one of the things that I've been dealing with lately, I don't know whether it's negative, positive, is that a lot of pastors are leaving ministry altogether. And it seems to be of epidemic proportions. And when I talk about leaving, I'm talking about young adults in their 30s, late 30s, maybe early 40s. And I was just talking to someone in our administration here just last week about this. And he said he doesn't think that a lot of pastors are in for the long haul anymore. When we got into ministry, we didn't think, well, after 10 years, I'm going to be doing something else.
Right.
We thought I'm going to still be in ministry, whether it's pastoral ministry, whether it's administration, the office, whether it's teaching.
Right.
But what we're seeing now is a lot of pastors are doing something completely different from ministry altogether. As far as working with the Adventist church. And I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it is what it is. And I want to know, why is that happening right now? Why are so many in that particular demographic feeling the need to pull away from the pastorate? Is it that it's become so difficult? Have they become disillusioned? Did they have unreal expectations as to what this thing was about? Because when we were coming up, the older guys, they told us what it was going to be. They told us how, it was going to be challenging, but God called you. And so you stay with it. But now there's so many options,
Right.
Pastors are just saying, well, you know what, I'll go and I'll do this, or I'll go and I'll do that. And it's leaving a lot of openings right now. Fewer are going to the seminary. Fewer are going into ministry, period.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, the graduating classes in theology are getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And certain demographics seem to be missing more and more in those graduating classes. That is changing.
Yeah.
You're in a position right now, though, Tapp, where you or somebody in your team could even do that kind of a study, even if it's just localized in your own conference.
Right.
We'll get some of those answers for us, because all of us need to answer that question, wherever we happen to be, of what's going on with the. Now, if they went into ministry, we're no better than they are. They went into ministry because they felt a calling.
Right.
But at some point, they feel like they need to go another direction. And you're right. Maybe it is a good thing. We don't. Look at it, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
What else? Give me one more thing you think about that has changed. What about the Adventist church? Let's put it that way. You came into the Adventist church at 16.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, self-motivated, as you just described. You must have had a high opinion of the church back then.
Right.
You came in.
Oh, yeah.
Into your growing up experience in another church, how do you see the church having changed over the last 40 years? What comes to your mind?
Now, that's a good question. When I came into the church, it was about community. I'm not seeing as much of that anymore. I think there's a shift from community, and I don't know how I should articulate this, from being a community to being a service. It's all about praise now, where a lot of the time, a lot of the emphasis, a lot of the money is on that hour and a half, 2-hour service on Sabbath, and then that's it. As opposed to when I came into it, it was a community. It was 3 or 4 days a week, connecting. Sabbath was like the highlight, and even Saturday night, coming together. There were things planned for us as young people. We didn't have to figure things out for ourselves. I don't see that kind of community anymore, on a large scale within the Adventist church. Not saying it's not there in some churches. I'm sure it is. And praise God for that. But that's one of the pieces I see that's missing. That's what kept us together as young adults, as youth in the church, that the older members valued us and poured into us and put the money where the mouth is. If you want to look at a vision, a mission of a church, look at their financial statement. Look at their budget. See where the money is going. If it's all going for the majority's sake to Sabbath morning, what kind of commentary is that? Are we just putting on a show once a week? Not saying that you shouldn't have, a vibrant worship service, well ordered and well orchestrated and all that. But if the majority of your money is going to that, what kind of commentary is that for the church in these particular days in which we're living?
Yes, I see your point. And now I'm thinking about it, how it's changed the last year and a half with the COVID. And of course, the magnification of the online ministry brought about by necessity.
Right.
Of course, some of the things that have come out of that will continue and should continue into the future, and how virtual worship affects community. How we try and find ways to stay connected in that kind of situation. You're getting into leadership in a very interesting time right now. You're going into the office, challenging time with no precedent.
Yeah, right.
You're becoming president during a time of a world pandemic,
right?
Worldwide illness, and which the world is still reacting to. It's not over yet. It's not done yet in our country.
Right.
So you're charting a course that doesn't have a precedent,
and that's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
That's a good thing because it gives us more opportunity. And so here's the thing that COVID did. It exposed a lot of our flaws as a church, because we were spending all this time on Sabbath morning, all this money there, and then COVID hit. Now what? Yes. Well, you can't have the big praise team and the band and all that stuff now. So what do you really have?
Now what? Yes.
And it exposed it, and we had to play catch up, in many ways. And churches that were fighting against certain things pre-COVID,
yes,
in the midst of COVID, are saying, please do it. Bring it on, do it. You had churches members who were fighting the online presence, and streaming. COVID hit. Oh, please, Pastor, what do we need to do? So, it's not a bad thing that there's no precedent set, because now that gives us opportunity to just go outside the box right now.
Yeah, be creative. And what it also does is it makes you more prayerful, because you're figuring it out day by day. You literally have no workbook. So it makes you more prayerful. Lord, what do I do next? Because my predecessor didn't face this challenge. One before him, one before, they never faced this before. And so you got to kind of advance on your knees. And that's a good thing. You are in a conference in Columbia Union, where your union decided some years ago, along Pacific Union, to ordain women pastors. So you have ordained women pastors in your conference. How have you seen that play out in your work there in Sligo, and now, of course, the position you're in right now? What can you share with us about that?
Well, it's actually growing. When I was pastoring at Sligo, we had no fewer than 3 female pastors at a time, which was good because they bring a completely different perspective. And I said to the church then at the time, I would not want to pastor a church and have associate pastors and not have a female or females on board, to have them sit at the table. But what I'm also discovering now, that there are a lot of women in ministry that are doing some great things. Even right here in Potomac, recently we put one of our female pastors, Heather, I shouldn't have mentioned her first name because I can't remember the last name right now. But she is one of our associates for ministry in Potomac. We put Lola Johnston Moore, who is now the senior pastor at one of the largest churches in our conference, where she has her own pastoral team. And that's the first in this conference where we have a female pastor with a team, of associates there. There are a lot of great female pastors out there right now that if they were just given a chance, given an opportunity, they have the same Holy Spirit. The Bible says in Joel, it's going to pour out upon all flesh.
All flesh.
Didn't say some flesh. It's all flesh. But if they were just given the opportunity, and as president, that's one of the things I want to do, is give some of these God-led women the opportunity to really allow God to use them in great and marvelous ways.
Amen. We had Lola on last week with a couple about women in ministry, and some of her journey. Some really inspiring young women coming into the work now. And I'm thinking now, at the same time we're saying that we're seeing a shortage on the one hand people living, and here are these women coming in.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a path right there, a journey that we don't see yet that's coming.
Yeah.
I'm looking up, and our time has just slipped away. I want to end on this. I want to give you just one moment to say a word about your colleague there in your union who lost his life yesterday, the Fordhams.
Right.
I won't say a word about that, but I give you a chance to say, I know you've had some dealing over the years as a co-worker in the same union.
Right.
What do you want to say?
You know, Elder Fordham was the president of Allegheny East, I believe 12 years. He and I sat on several of the same committees together. He and his wife had come to our church many times because our church is on the campus of the university. And it was just a shock. I still can't put my head around, the tragedy that has happened. We quickly put out a statement, to the broader community, but to the family, we just want to say that your Potomac family is with you. Our hearts are hurting. Our prayers and our tears are with you. And we just pray for God's grace and his comfort to get you through this most difficult and challenging time in your lives.
I want to share the same sentiment, Pastor Tapp, with the Fordhams. Many of us do, just how large that family is.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
In leadership and throughout all those Adventist names that tie into the Fordham name. We have a nephew in our conference here, recently come to the office, Elder Fordham's nephew, Fordham III, a part of our conference family here in South Central, and of course, Allegheny East for many years. And of course, like you say, our hearts are hurting. We can't imagine what you must be feeling, but our prayers are with you. And of course, to remind us of this hope that we have, a hope that we have that will soon come to pass when the Lord Jesus returns. Here's what the Bible says. You know it already, and so do I. He will wipe away all tears from our eyes, and we'll have nothing but joy forever.
Amen.
Our prayers to the Fordham family and to the Allegheny East family as well in your loss at this time. May God be with you. Pastor Tapp, loving it, man. You're my boy. And you're my man down through the years. Our paths have crossed. A blessing to me, brother. Thanks for giving us this time tonight. God be with you as you lead out there in Potomac. And our paths will cross again in peace. And together we'll be in the kingdom one day when Jesus comes. Be faithful. Give our love to the family.
Will do. Will do, man.
God bless you, saints. We'll be our next live is set for August 9. We have a panel on leading from the pew. We'll be talking about some lay leaders in their churches who've struck out and started their own ministries. Our next Monday Night Live, August 9, right here, leading from the pew. Until then, visit the site, hearmenow.ministries.com. Sign up for a class. Sign up for a mentor group. We're starting our mentor groups next month as well. hearmenow.ministries.com. Visit, see what's there for you. Take part, and God bless you as we go forward. Pastor, God be with you.
God bless you, man.
All right. Bye-bye.